Benedict was born in 480, along with his twin sister in Europe up in the central mountains in Italy. And at that time, Europe was in a bit of chaos, and the Christian church had some internal conflict going on. And so those things were kind of heavy on his heart. And then he was sent off to Rome to receive his education. But while he was in Rome and getting his education, he just became kind of disgusted by what he saw. And it just seemed irrelevant, the classes. And in fact, the way he said it was, it's just a cycle of studying, a dull cycle of studying and drunken partying. So he just decided, I don't think this is for me. And he had heard about these early Christian desert fathers, these people that separated themselves from the easy city life and went out into the Egyptian wilderness to pursue solitude and prayer, all out of their desire and love for God. And so he decided this is what he wanted to do. So without telling his parents, he left and ran away and went into the hills to become a monk, or a hermit, I should say. So real quick, this is how you hope your child runs away, right? Out of their desire, disdain for the easy city life and their love for God, they run away to pursue a deeper connection with God. I ran away from home one time. It lasted about 40 minutes because my parents found me as I was walking down the street. And then they brought me back home, which completely defeats the whole purpose of running away from home, by the way. But at least I didn't run out of food. Anyway, so Benedict, he runs away and he becomes a hermit. He lives in a cave that he called the place of my beloved solitude. Eventually, St. Benedict, he comes out of this cave and he starts 12 monasteries with 12 monks in each one. And the whole goal of the life in the monastery was balance. It was just about helping people find balance in their lives once again. So it wasn't like excessive fasting or like night after night of no sleep and constant prayer. It was about balance, but he knew that we need to be trained with intentional habits in order to create space for God and for one another. So he came up with what became known as the Benedict rule, and it was this way of life that people lived in the monasteries, and it had to do with everything: exercise, diet, work, play, rest, prayer, time in Scripture, time together with one another, all of it. Okay. But the goal of it wasn't that you'd become some spiritual superstar, okay? Anybody was welcome in his monastery. All that you had to have was two things: a love for God and a commitment to his way his regimen in the monastery. It wasn't about being a spiritual superstar. It was about ruthlessly eliminating hurry from our lives so that we can live the life that God wants for us in the way of Jesus, right? This is what Jesus talked about himself. Jesus said in John 14:6, he said, I am the way, the truth, and the life. I am truth. I'm also the way. My way of life, the things that I actually do, are the things that you are to do, right? Following Jesus isn't just something that we believe in. It is belief, and salvation, of course, is by grace, and we receive that, freely through faith. It has nothing to do with works, but following Jesus isn't just a set of doctrines or a belief. It is also something that we do. And so the Benedict rule helped people do the way of Jesus. Now, maybe when you hear the word rule, you don't like it very much. You think of rules, and who likes rules? They're restricting, they're rigid, they're controlling. It's not something that we're typically a fan of. Jordan Peterson, he's a psychologist. You may have heard of him. He wrote a book that on Amazon wrote in 2018. It was a #1 bestseller for over a year, not just nationally, but internationally. #1 bestseller. And here's the title of the book: 12 Rules for Life, right? Who would buy this? Apparently, everybody would buy this. 12 rules for life. The subtitle's a little bit more, kind of grabby. An antidote to chaos. He looks at how chaos in our lives leads to anxiety. I got my February 2020 Outside magazine. Okay, anybody? Outside magazine? No, okay, all right. Well, anyway, moving on. The lead story says this: Americans are overworked, overscheduled, and just plain exhausted. The solution: forget about radical diets and intense new fitness plans. That made your day. What we all really need is to slow down. And slow is spelled with 4 O's, so I'm not just being obnoxious up here. We need to slow down. Presenting 17 relaxing strategies for beating back stress and reclaiming your mojo in 2020. Are you overworked, overscheduled, and exhausted? No problem. Just do these 17 things. Don't mess them up. I love it. So here's the thing. We are living life then, apparently, we are living life at a pace that is unhealthy, right? That's the point of all of this. We're living life at a pace that is unhealthy, and we need something to help us with that, right? 17 things in there, 10 things over here, 4 things, whatever. We're living life at a pace that's unhealthy for us, and we need something to help us with that. It's easy for us to get out of balance. Maybe it's a new year. Maybe you're out of balance in some area in your life right now. It could be anything. We get out of balance with our diet or our rest or our finances, our marriage, our prayer life, our time in Scripture, our time together in church, Christian community. I mean, we can fall out of balance so easily in many different ways, and we need something to help us move from that unhealthy place to a much better place. We started this little mini-series last week. It's just last week and this week on eliminating hurry. So last week, Nate talked about how we live at this hurry, frantic pace, right? This chaotic type of pace of life where our head is above water. We're racing from one thing to the next, and we're kind of barely hanging on. And it's causing us often to be, irritable, exhausted, worn out, hypersensitive. Those are the things that we're experiencing, instead of a life of love and joy and peace and the things that God has for us and wants for us. So what can help us with that? And today I want to look at and suggest that a rule of life helps us with that. And here's why. This is what it is. This is the key idea, that a rule of life, it helps reorientate our lives so that God is once again, or maybe for the first time, at the center of our daily rhythms, right? A rule of life helps us reorientate. It helps us find that balance once again so that God is at the center of everything we do, of our daily rhythms. That is the things from when we wake up in the morning to when we go to bed at night. All of those habits and patterns and things that we do that take place, that God is at the center of all of them. And so today I want to look at how a rule of life helps us with that, how that happens, and just one thing from Jesus's life that's essential for eliminating hurry. So, how does a rule of life help us? A rule of life gives us structure. It gives us structure. Turn over to John 15. I want to read a passage that may be familiar to many of you, John 15. Where Jesus explains something and really gives a metaphor for us. John 15, verse 1. He says, I am the true vine, and my Father is the gardener. He cuts off every branch in me that bears no fruit, while every branch that does bear fruit, he prunes, so that it will be even more fruitful. You are already clean because of the word that I've spoken to you. Now, in these next few verses, listen to how many times Jesus uses the word remain. Remain in me, as I also remain in you. No branch can bear fruit by itself. It must remain in the vine. Neither can you bear fruit unless you remain in me. I am the vine and you are the branches. If you remain in me and I in you, then you will bear much fruit. Apart from me, you can do nothing. If you do not remain in me, you are like a branch that's thrown away and withers. Such branches are picked up and thrown into the fire and burned. If you remain in me and my words remain in you, ask whatever you wish and it will be done for you. This is to my Father's glory, that you bear much fruit, things like love and joy and peace, showing yourselves to be my disciples. So Jesus gives a metaphor. It's fairly straightforward and simple. He says that he is the vine, and we, as his followers, are the branches. And the branches connect to the vine. And, good things happen when we're connected to the vine. Bad things happen when we're not connected to the vine. And God the Father is the gardener or the farmer, okay? Which is good because at this time, cultivating vines to produce fruit was a labor-intensive and complicated, or I should say more labor-intensive and complicated than other crops. So this is one of the more difficult things to do. And so not only is it good that the Father's the farmer and that he produces fruit, but also what would happen with a vine, in order for it to be healthy, in order for it to grow and to produce this fruit like an actual vine, it was often attached to a trellis. And the vine and the branches, they were trained to grow up the trellis so that they would produce fruit and be healthy. This very word rule comes from the Latin regular. It means like straight piece of wood or a ruler. It was often used to speak of a trellis. And here's the point of all of this. Just as a trellis is to a vine, providing structure, support, kind of a framework for it to be trained to grow and to be healthy, so a rule of life is to you and me. We need structure so that we are trained to follow Jesus. Some of you have tried to do what like Jesus wants you to do, and you tried it and it didn't work. And then you're like, well, maybe I just didn't try hard enough. So then the next week, you tried to do what Jesus wanted you to do again, and it didn't work out so well either. And you're like, you know what, I'll give it one more try. I'll give it my best. I'll give it everything I have. And so you tried it again, and you gave it your best effort, and it went a little bit better, but it still didn't really work out. And you left thinking, maybe this whole Jesus thing isn't quite for me. Maybe doing what Jesus wants me to do, maybe it works for other people, it doesn't work so much for me. But following Jesus and doing the things that Jesus did isn't about trying for them to do them. It is about training for them to do them, right? It's about training for. My oldest son, Hayden, he's in the military. He was home at Christmas, which was awesome. He's in the Navy, and he's in special forces there, and he got 2 weeks off of Christmas. So this is like, angels from heaven coming down. So he's home from Christmas, and we're hanging out with him. And you already know, all of you, right, that the military has structure coming out their ears, right? It's redonkulous. It's crazy. So he's got that going on. And he's been in for 1.5 years, and he has done nothing except be trained. 1.5 years. He hasn't done anything except be trained. Said, hey, what was when he was in basic in the very beginning, he's like, man, Dad, I folded clothes all the time. You're talking about a kid who's like, he has never folded a pair of pants in his life. We fold clothes. It's ridiculous. We have to make our bed perfectly. We put our uniform on. If there's a thread like coming out, some instructor is in your face tearing your head off like you are the worst human being on planet Earth because there's a thread over here. And he's just like, it's all, but later he realizes, they're not just training us to do, to keep all the threads off. They're training us to, do things that maybe we don't always like to do, to follow orders, to pay attention to detail, like things like that. Structure is necessary for training. And when it comes to following Jesus, it's not just, following Jesus isn't just something that we believe, it's something that we do. And in order to follow Jesus well, we need to be trained in that. And structure provides training for that. And here's the thing, Jesus lived with this type of structure in his life as well. Jesus did this. And so I want us to piece this together, that if Jesus lived with a type of structure in his life as part of, so that he would have a rule of life, it's probably a good idea for us to consider this as well. Think about Jesus with me for a minute, right? He was rarely in a hurry. He was hardly in a hurry. He gets news that his best friend Lazarus is about to die, and he shows up 3 days later. The dude's already dead. And his friends come to him when he gets there, and literally they essentially say to him, like, what took you so long? What took you so long? He's dead, he's gone. It's like, I'm sorry, I'm not really a guy that runs around in a hurry, frantically racing from thing to thing, swept up in the chaoticness of life. Or this time when Jairus comes to him and says, my daughter is sick, she needs help, and she needs it like now, again, and Jesus says, okay, let's go. So great, so they're on their way, they're going there, and this other woman, right, comes up to Jesus, grabs his cloak because she wants some help, and Jesus stops, turns around, starts talking to her, starts helping her. If I'm Jairus, right, with my daughter over there that needs help, I'm like, lady, go back off, go get in line, go get your own Jesus. Like, I got this one, we're going, my daughter needs help, we got somewhere to be, we got somewhere to go. Jesus didn't do that. Right? Rarely was he ever in a hurry. He just didn't really conduct and live his life that way. Jesus's rule of life included something that's essential for us to eliminate hurry. And it's this one thing that I want to look at today. And that is that his rule of life included a quiet place. A quiet place. And it was part of his rule of life. A quiet place. Think about how Jesus started. Before he did any ministry, he spent 40 days out in the wilderness fasting and praying. Can you even imagine? Let's just say you go to your boss, maybe your spouse, family, person, whoever, whatever, and you, hey, I want to go 40 days in the wilderness. Are you okay with that? And for the sake of argument, yes, sure, absolutely, please go, no problem. Okay, let's just assume. Can you imagine spending 40 days in the wilderness fasting and praying? No, you cannot, right? And neither can I. Which is a bit of a problem if you stop and think about it, right? That this is something that Jesus did, and we're just like, well, I don't know, I guess it's because he's Jesus. Of course, he's Jesus. But he did it, and we can't imagine, we can't begin to fathom that. Probably, we all have room for growth, I guess. Can you imagine 4 days out in the wilderness? That you can begin to picture, right? And the images coming to your mind are probably not good, like your cold sweats rolling on the ground, someone help me. Like it would be tough. But this is Jesus, 40 days fasting and praying. And then right after the 40 days, he calls some disciples to follow him, and he goes in the synagogue and he starts teaching, and then he starts healing some people and helping some other people. He's got a full day. And then the very next day, turn over to Mark chapter 1. This is what Jesus does. Mark 1 verse 35. So 40 days and then a full day of doing a bunch of things, ministry. And then verse 35. Very early in the morning, while it was still dark, Jesus got up, he left the house, and he went off to a solitary place where he prayed. Simon and his companions went to look for him, and when they found him, they exclaimed, "Everyone is looking for you." So you see, this is part of Jesus's rule of life, this quiet place, something that he did regularly. And he goes off to this place and he's praying there. If you spent 40 days praying, if I spent 40 days praying straight, I'm thinking I'm probably good for, 6 months, right? Before I need to come, I got prayer falling out my ears, man. You serious? One day, and then he wakes up the next morning while it's still dark, and he goes and he prays. Think with me about the things that a quiet place offers and how this all helps us to eliminate hurry. So the first one is this prayer. A quiet place offers prayer. If we look in Luke, another time, it says it this way: "Yet the news about him spread all the more, so that crowds of people came to hear him and to be healed of their sicknesses, but Jesus often withdrew to lonely places and prayed." why did Jesus often withdraw? Why it's not, and Jesus, every now and then, or hey, this one time he went, Jesus often. Why did he often withdraw? Because a quiet place was part of his rule of life. He knew that it was necessary to not get caught up in the hurry and the franticness and the pace of life that was happening all around him. And it wasn't because, right, he just had all this extra time on his hands and he had nothing to do, so he just went off. No. He had people coming to him all the time. And in fact, what I read a moment ago in Mark 1, it said that when he goes off to pray, his disciples come and find him, and they say to him, Jesus, everyone is looking for you. Everyone. Now, I don't know, was he actually praying? And they're kind of nudging him hey, everyone's looking for you. I don't know. What I do know is, have you ever felt like everyone is looking for you? I don't have time for a quiet place. Everyone's looking for it, particularly between the ages of 1 and 18. They're looking for me all the time. And the younger they are, the needier they are, and the more they suck the life out of me. The interruptions are constant. And here's the point is, for Jesus, the interruptions were constant in his life. But he prioritized a quiet place as part of his rule of life because it offered him prayer. And it almost seems as if the more Jesus had going on, the more important it was for him to have a quiet place where he would spend some time in prayer. And it seems like for us, sometimes the busier, the more we have going on, the less time we make and have for a quiet place and time for prayer. And that just seems very backwards, doesn't it? Martin Luther said this, and good luck with this. I have so much to do that I shall spend the first 3 hours in prayer. I just wanted to say something that was just going to make you feel like you're never going to get there. No, I'm just kidding. That's Martin Luther. We'll leave him alone. But there's something to say there. A quiet place offers prayer. Another thing it offers is margin. It offers us margin. So when we continue in the story of Mark that we were looking at, right after they say, hey, everyone's looking for you, then Jesus replied, he said, well, hey, let's go somewhere else to the nearby villages so that I can preach there also. That is why I have come. Which is a way of Jesus saying, hey, we're done here. We need to say no to these people so we can say yes to some people over there. How did Jesus know when to say yes and when to say no? Well, margin helps us to do that. And he goes off and he helps these other people, and other people need to be healed. And then when that's done, in verse 46, after he healed a guy and told him not to tell other people about it, instead, he went out and he began to talk freely, spreading the news. And as a result, Jesus could no longer enter a town openly, but stayed outside in lonely places. Yet the people still came to him from everywhere. So however full and bombarded your life can be at times, Jesus knows that very well. And it makes it all the more reason why he has a quiet place as part of his rule of life. Because it gives margin, it offers margin. Richard Swanson says that margin is the space between your load and your limit. We all have the same limit. It's 100%. But we're not all carrying the same load. And some of you maybe are at a place right now where the load that you're carrying is 90%, 98%, 110%, right? If the load you're carrying is 110%, but your limit is 100%, obviously you have no margin. It's a sure recipe for burnout and disaster. This is not how you want to spend 2020. This is not how you want to go into a new year. This is not what you want for your life. You have to find a way to create more margin, the space between those two things. And a quiet place offers that very thing. Another thing that it offers when we turn a couple pages to Mark 6 is that a quiet place offers rest. Jesus knew the importance of rest. And so this was all part of his rule of life. In Mark 6, when we turn a couple pages to Mark 6, it says, then because so many people were coming and going, all right, this is this theme over and over and over, constant interruptions, constant people coming to him, needing, wanting, that they did not even have a chance to eat. That's how much that they've got going on in their lives right now. They had to skip a meal. So he said to them, hey, come with me by yourselves to a quiet place and get some rest. So they went away by themselves in a boat to a solitary place. Jesus knows that a quiet place offers us rest, which we need. Unless if you're in a place with a bunch of lunatics that when you get in the boat to go to the other side, they run ahead of you to get there first, to wait for you so that when you, Jesus, and your disciples get out of the boat, they're right there like, a bunch of lost puppy dogs, like just ready to I need, give me, I want, which is what happened. And Jesus says, well, there's a big crowd and they need stuff from us and they're hungry. Let's feed them. And Jesus feeds the thousands of them. And then immediately after that, Jesus made his disciples get into the boat again and go on ahead of him to Bethsaida while he dismissed the crowd. And after leaving them, he went up on a mountainside to pray. Later that night, the boat was in the middle of the lake and he was alone on land. Jesus knew with everything he had going on, with the constant wave of people coming to him, that he would burn out without rest. Isn't it interesting to me that when I think of us, we often live life in a way where we think, what is the least amount of rest that I can get? Because I have so much to do. I have so much going on. What is the least amount of sleep, the least amount of rest, so that I can just function, kind of one click above a zombie with loads of caffeine in me to get done what I need to get done, right? This is sometimes our thinking, our mentality. And Jesus is saying, nope, in your rule of life, have a quiet place. Because a quiet place offers you something that is essential that you need for your emotional health, for your spiritual vitality, for you to eliminate hurry from your life. And that is, it offers you rest and margin and a time for prayer and a time for silence. A quiet place offers silence from all of the noise and the distractions all around us. I don't have to convince any of you that the amount of noise that bombards our lives externally and internally, for that matter, is constant. It's extreme. And a quiet place offers us a time where it's just, we get away from it, we turn it all off, the distractions are gone, we literally remove them, and we close our mouths and we listen and we're quiet and it's silent. And this is necessary for us. C.S. Lewis wrote the Screwtape Letters. And the senior demon, his name is Screwtape in the book. If you haven't read it, get it and read it. And the senior demon is Screwtape. He calls the devil's realm a kingdom of noise. And he claims this: we will make the whole universe a noise in the end. Why? Because Satan knows that he doesn't have to do things specifically to derail our lives spiritually. He can do this or do that or whatever, but he could just simply create so much noise in our lives, so many distractions, so much stuff and chaos going on all around us, that we are ineffective, that we're lost, that we get caught in this rat race, that we're exhausted, that we're burned out. A quiet place offers us silence, and lastly, it offers us solitude. And solitude Solitude is a way that we engage with God. It's a way that our soul comes alive. It's a way that our spirit connects with God. It's about engaging with him. Isolation is about escaping. Solitude is about saying, God, I'm here to be with you, to connect with you, to hear from you, to spend time in your presence. So, can I encourage you today, the beginning of a new year, to make at least one thing your rule of life in 2020, and that is a quiet place. To make a quiet place your rule. And if you have a quiet place now, great, keep at it. If you don't, begin one. And if you don't have one, don't start with an hour a day. It's probably not gonna work for you. Start smaller, start 10 minutes or something attainable. Start with that and just begin to have a quiet place so that you can eliminate hurry and find emotional, spiritual health and wellness. My challenge for you then is to take a step beyond that in 2020 and make a simple rule of life, very simple, just beginning with your mind, body, and spirit. Remember, a rule of life is about reorientating our lives so that God is at the center of our daily rhythms. So that can have to do with our marriage and finances and all kinds of things. But just begin with your mind, body, spirit. Remember what Jesus says, love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and soul. So start with these things in your mind. What does your screen time look like right now? What does your time in scripture look like? What's your thought life consist of? With your body, think of your diet, your exercise, your rest. How are they? How healthy are, how in balance are these things? Think of your spirit. Do you have a time of prayer where your spirit connects with God's spirit? Do you have times of quiet where you're just listening? Is there something in your spirit that needs to heal, that you need to focus on and allow healing to take place in you? Think about these things and write a simple rule of life. And don't think of where you should be and then make a rule of life there. Like I should have, 8 hours of sleep a night. So by rest, 8 hours. I'm currently at 4.5 hours, but I should have 8. So that's don't start with where you should be. Look at where you are now and then just take one step toward health and wellness in the right direction. I want to close with just reading to you a bit from the prologue of Saint Benedict's rule. And I hope that the invitation that he gives in his rule is an invitation for you to write your own rule of life at the beginning of this year. And here's what he says. We have therefore to establish a school of the Lord's service, in the institution of which we hope that we are going to establish nothing harsh and nothing burdensome. But if prompted by the desire to attain to equity, anything be set forth that's somewhat strict is for the correction of vice or for the preservation of charity. For it is by progressing in the life of conversion and faith that with heart enlarged and in sweetness of love, one runs in the way of God's commandments, so that never deserting his or her discipleship, we may partake by patience in the suffering of Christ and become worthy inheritors of his kingdom.